Welcome back to 90 Feet Away. Today we are joined by an outstanding young coach. I call him a young coach because he's 10 years younger than me, and no matter what, he's going to always be a young coach. He's one of the best in the game. We are joined by Bucknell head coach Scott Heather.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
No, it's great to have you, man. This is like so overdue. You're one of my favorite people in this industry. Just to give a little background to the audience, my oldest son, who is now 32 and a pretty successful lawyer and father of two, was lucky enough to be coached by Coach Heather, actually in your first year coaching at Bucknell University, which is kind of crazy. We were talking about this last night at dinner, that his 10-year anniversary has come up, and, life just is flying by.
For sure. Time flies when you're having fun.
Absolutely. So, Scott Heather, the baseball player, I want to start there for a little bit. Scott Heather, for people that don't know, born and raised in the Minnesota area, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
What was your recruiting like then, right? Because it's totally different than things are now. But, for me, it's how does a guy from Minnesota end up at a school in Arkansas and then, end up lucky enough to finish out playing for Arkansas?
For sure. Well, out of high school, I played for a Hall of Fame coach, a legendary coach in Dennis Denning, and really it was about his connections and, the people he knew, with that. I actually started off in junior college being from Minnesota, being a baseball player. I had a few Division I opportunities in the North, out of high school, looked into that. But he really encouraged the junior college option, for me down in Arizona Western first. And that's where his son went. And then he ended up at the University of Minnesota, and it really was him recommended me to John Stratton, another Hall of Fame coach who I played for at Arizona Western, and decided to go there. I wanted to open it up for possible bigger opportunities, and it worked out. At the junior college, times were really different too. We had one phone, a pay phone to the hallway of 20 baseball players, and Arkansas would call me in the morning, and I'd be sleeping, and I had to hope, somebody would wake up and answer the phone. And it just so happened that I got a call, from Arkansas, and I was pretty close to, committing to San Diego State at the time, a little bit better financial offer, but decided, Arkansas had kind of just gone to the SEC and decided to go there. And that kind of came about because a player from my high school, recommended me to Arkansas. He played for them, played in the College World Series. It was a lot of word of mouth back then, and it just so happened that the assistant coach at Arkansas had a good friend of that was a coach at Mesa University, and I just shut them out. So the timing worked perfect. The recommendation came. They looked into it. I just threw a shot out against them, and they offered, and I ended up there.
Well, you talk about relationships, because 30 plus years ago when you were going through this, there were no college showcases, right?
No.
There was none of that existed. So it had to be based on either a recommendation or almost like a scouting scenario where a guy happened to be there looking at somebody. That in itself, from then to today, is mind-boggling, because how would a kid from the Minnesota area end up in Arizona? I mean,
Right.
Think about that. What a huge change for you to up and go there.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a culture shock, to head down there, and it definitely was opened up by the relationship my high school head coach and the coach at Arizona Western had. He was originally from Minnesota himself. He coached at the University of Arizona a little bit, who also had a Minnesota connection, Jerry Kindle. So it really was about relationships, and coaches had a lot of pull, back then, and really, as I think about it, as people that I played with that recommended me, or the same guy that recommended me to Arkansas recommended my brother to Iowa Western. And, it's just a small world. Like, somebody that played with you growing up, helps you out somehow, and you get an opportunity that, it was just done by word of mouth back then.
Quick question for you. How involved were your parents, if at all, back then?
My dad would just sit down in the right field line and watch the games, enjoy the games. Never really got involved. He coached me, probably, growing up, through, 7th, 8th grade, and then, kind of turned it over. And, they were involved in helping me make the decision, but it really was up to me. He wasn't reaching out to anybody for me or anything like that. It was all done pretty late. I was well into my senior season, towards the end of my senior season, when I decided to go to Arizona Western. I had talked to, University of Minnesota a little bit. Nothing really happened there. I just was kind of on their radar, and, that's kind of where I wanted to go, and it wasn't working out. So I ended up, trying to keep the options open, and as far as that type of level, and get an opportunity to play and compete. In fact, that team at Arizona Western was really, really good. I went down there. I was number 8 on the staff as a freshman, and ended up at Arkansas. So pretty talented group for sure.
Wow. If you look back in your life a little bit, before we start getting specific about today, could you have foreseen anything like spending over 20 years in Lewisburg now?
I wasn't sure I was going to make it through the first year, with that. Baseball's taken me to a lot of different places, and, was in Arkansas for a good amount of time and wanted to get, in the Division I level, and, had that opportunity, and worked for another Hall of Fame, coach, and Gene Depew, gave me an opportunity to come in and let me coach. And, so that was, once we got through that first year and decided to stay, it wasn't long before I sort of became a lifer here, and just really enjoy Lewisburg. Great place to raise, my family, small town. I still get to play noontime basketball, which is a passion. The guys don't pass it to me very much anymore, but I'm out there playing defense and rebounding, with that. But I just enjoy, like, the camaraderie with the coaching staff. Everybody's right here, good friends with, the basketball coach as well, football coach, all, the women's coach, basketball coach, softball coach. Like, we all know each other really well, which, makes for we're all pulling for each other. Makes for a great atmosphere.
Well, Bucknell is big enough to be D1, but it's small enough where you still have that family surrounding, right? Like, everybody truly cares and supports one another, which is great, right? There are pros and cons to everything.
For sure.
One of the things I think attracted us and bringing Jordan there was just that, that you weren't just a number at that school. Everybody kind of knew who you were and what you were up to, and making sure that everybody was doing okay. You take over in 2014? No,
2013, I think.
2013, correct. 2013 is your first year as the head coach. What are you going through yourself, mentally, emotionally? Like, are you ready to just hit this head on? Are you having any doubts about now being responsible instead of just being an assistant? What was that first year like for you, Coach?
Yeah, it was, it was exciting, rejuvenating, came at a great time in my life, for that. I think one of the best things to happen to me with that is I didn't get the job right away. Like, there was some time going into it before the interview. Gene retired, going into the season, kind of announced it, and so I had a long time to prepare, and, really delved into, in that month before the interview, delved into, all right, what's it going to look like? What am I going to do? What am I going to keep? What am I going to change? And that allowed me to really kind of hit the ground running once I got the program. Gene had it set up in a way, to allow the players to succeed both academically and athletically. And I knew I wanted to keep that. And everything he did, every decision he made, he kept that in mind. And, and I still do that today. There's a lot of things the same, and obviously you have to put your own personality into it and what you are and put your stamp on it. But, and it just was I was ready for it. It's something I dreamed of for a long time, since a young kid. I used to imagine that. And, to run your own program it's a dream come true, and lucky to have done it for this long.
And then I believe it was year 2, you win the Patriot League.
Right. No, it was, had a great group of freshmen that came in that kind of, brought a lot of energy to the program, and a great group of returning guys that just, blended and kind of took off, we worked really hard, and there was a grind that first year. Had a great group of captains that helped build, the culture of the program, and it kind of, took off that next year. We were, we could hit, we could really pitch, and, exciting time to be the head coach.
Well, that leads me into where we are today. We're not going to talk about COVID yet. We're not going to talk about the transfer portal yet. What does Coach Scott Heather, Coach Jason Knights look for when they're recruiting a student athlete to Bucknell? Because for people that don't understand, the Patriot League, there is no athletic money, even though it's a Division I school. So what are you looking for here, Coach?
Yeah, and we have to make sure we get it right in a lot of ways. It's number one, not just about baseball. There's 2 parts to it. We have to meet basically the same average student that the school brings in. And, so a lot goes into that in choosing your 8 guys. But I think, obviously the talent and the type of player matters. I mean, that's where you start, and you go watch somebody play, you talk to the people that coach them. Once you know that the baseball part is good enough, you got to delve into it further and see, where, how can they help the program in other ways? How are they going to fit in? I've made the mistake of choosing, talent over character at times. You see the talent and you think you can, fix maybe the character issues, and that's hard to do. So we look into, how the family is, and are they going to fit in? We have a family atmosphere. Our parents are very involved in our program, and we finish, every day saying Bison and family. And we want that to be a part of it. We want, good guys to be around. I want it to be somebody, that we want to coach, and that we're looking forward to being around each day. I think that helps in so many ways. It makes it a fun experience for the players. And if their attitude and energy is good and they're invested in what they want to do daily, it's going to work out. It's going to work out a lot better than if there's a lot of friction each day. And, I've certainly learned from experience with that. And, it's important to look into all aspects, with that. Baseball wise, I try to make sure our team is balanced. We go heavy into, the left-handed side, both pitching and hitting wise. We think, the way our park plays, it's an advantage, to have that. So, we're trying to make sure we're pretty even, right and left-handed hitters, all that type of stuff. But offensively, I want guys that put pressure on opponents. That can be a variety of things. One thing we look at pretty heavily is, are they swinging at the right pitches? If they're chasing even like a bad high school breaking ball, they're going to struggle at the college level. So that's something we look at. We work at it a lot. It's something we feel we can improve, but we can't drastically change. So that's a big thing for us is are they swinging at the right pitches? We can make a swing adjustment, but how they see the ball, I think it plays big at the next level. Pitching wise, I think you got to have balance there too. You want guys that have that upside, but nowadays everybody's throwing harder and they're throwing, fewer strikes. So we got caught with maybe a group of really talented guys that didn't throw enough strikes to really win at the college level. that may be good. You can develop in pro ball, but we have to win games, and strikes is what it comes down to a lot of times, in command, and not hurting. Teams that are winning in college baseball are not hurting themselves. So that's what we go after.
One of my favorite, you can't see it now, but one of my favorite taglines and posters all over the facility is, I don't care how hard you throw ball for.
Right.
I mean, it's just paramount, being ahead, and as we know, baseball is a game of first. So if I'm ahead and I'm putting pressure on the batter, I'm helping my team. So that leads me to a little bit of today, now that we have an idea of what you're recruiting, and this isn't a Bucknell specific question. This is more Patriot League. Because of COVID, because of the fifth year, and in some cases the sixth year, has that impacted Patriot League teams or not as much, Coach?
For sure. I mean, I think it's a factor. It doesn't affect Army and Navy as much. There were 3 schools that didn't have, an underclassman going to portal last year, and it was Army, Navy, and us. We were the only non-academy to have that. And, it's a challenge. You have to think about it, consider it. Obviously, the academics, that we have, keep guys here, that's important to make sure we're set up in a way where they feel like they're reaching their potential in both. That helps keep guys here. But recruiting wise, it's a huge factor. The portal is a whole nother recruiting job. The summer hits, our season ends, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of players reaching out. There's all kinds of players available. You're having to make sure your players are coming back, and then you're trying to recruit the 8 high school guys that you have. So we're not in a position where we can survive losing a bunch of players, year in and year out. We don't redshirt in our league. Everybody graduates in 4 years, so we're younger. We played Florida International, and our guys were with their guys a little bit in the training room, and they asked how old. Our guy was 21. They're like, well, what are you, a sophomore? And I was like, no, senior. And, they had a very old team, that had kind of been through a lot of baseball wars. So it's different. It's a challenge. We're kind of the old school way in the Patriot League in a lot of ways. And, there's a lot of benefits to that, but it's a challenge when you go play those older teams.
It's a challenge when you're playing the front end of your schedule. Correct.
Right.
Once you're in conference and everybody's on even footing, you're fine. Right. But what you're going to play, your 18-year-old freshmen are playing 23-year-old sophomores.
Right.
And they've got 4 or 5 years either JUCO ball or redshirt from injury. Yeah, it's a whole different ball game there. I think the Patriot League and the Ivy League are different in that, although the Ivy League gave a 5th year after COVID, they had never done that before. You could play and redshirt and then transfer somewhere else.
Right.
They've now allowed a 5th year. Is the Patriot League allowing a 5th year or no?
So in the Patriot League, in order to get, a 5th year player, it has to be somebody within your program. And then you have to have something academically keeping them there. As I said, all our guys graduate in 4 years. So we had a lot of graduate guys move on and play at other places. We've only had one, and you know him well, Alex O'Neill, who stayed here a 5th year, after transferring here in the old days before all this. But he decided to stay here. It wasn't easy. We're not set up well for that. Lehigh in our league, has some grad school, but you have to start there. You can't go to grad school there and then play. You have to already have been there. That's a league rule. I think Army and Navy kind of make sure that happened because they'd be at a disadvantage if we had that.
100%. So obviously we spoke about Army and Navy. Are you and your staff looking in the portal or at all at the end of the year? See, as a coach, you used to know who I have. I got these guys for 4 years, right? So luckily you haven't lost guys to the portal and nobody went into the portal. But if you have an injury, if something didn't work out, are you now looking in the portal? to get a guy with experience as opposed to a 17, 18-year-old high school senior?
For sure. We felt, we needed to bring in a catcher this past year, and we were able to do that to add some depth. And I think we will be, looking at it a little bit this year, just because I think there'll be more players available, with the rosters being reduced. There's going to be some opportunities to improve our team. In the transfer portal, we saved some opportunities, to do that. But generally, it's hard for us to get transfers. Not many people leave Bucknell in general, and spots have to open up. And by the time the portal opens up, the school is pretty much settled in as far as what it's going to look like this year. We're basically kind of adding on to that. They need beds, they need, places to stay, all that type of stuff. It becomes a challenge. Classes are, can be difficult to get into later in the summer. All that stuff, plays a role. And it takes us longer to make a decision whether to let them in. And, another school is saying, hey, you're in, here's 50%. We just lose out on a lot of those guys because of the academic setup, with that. So we have to keep our guys. And, we have to be, active in doing that, making sure, they're enjoying it and they want to stay.
I'm perplexed by the ever-changing world, right? The ever-changing baseball world. Because I don't know that it's been passed yet, but the NJCAA and the NCAA are talking about now not counting 2 years of junior college against your eligibility. So in essence, giving every athlete 6 years. Have you thought about that? And then what would your recommendation be? Because to me, as a coach, I may think this kid's really good out of high school, but with 2 more years of a quote-unquote baseball resume, I can be a little bit more sure if I think he can help us win at Bucknell. What are your thoughts on that, Coach?
Yeah, I think it's something that's very interesting, that I hope doesn't happen. I think that's a long time to be playing college sports, with that. But if it were to come, I think we'd have to adjust. I think there would be some kids that we would, all right, come from junior college, get your degree from Bucknell, have that in your pocket, and then have 2 years. If you're one of our best players, you're going to have opportunities at the highest level. We have moved guys on, to Virginia Tech and Virginia and things like that, from our program that like our best guys would have that opportunity. So there's a pitch there, all right, come from junior college, graduate and then have, the extra, eligibility on the back end, in a lot of ways, with that. And it's almost like a second junior college experience for them. But the pitch would still be centered around getting your degree. That's the best thing we have going. What our guys are at age 35, compared to a lot of places, I think it's a big difference. And, and that's still what we got to champion and what we got to be about.
I mean, personally, I can speak to that not only with Jordan, but all the teammates that he still keeps in touch with. These guys, as a parent, I think my dream was, and it didn't take very long, is I wanted my kids to all be better than me, and it didn't take them long to surpass that. But you're right. I mean, Jordan at 32 is doing great things, and so are his teammates from that year of his recruiting. For me, I want the audience to understand a little bit about your season ends. Let's say you win the Patriot League and you get knocked out of the NCAA tournament, because that's where I want to see you every year.
Right.
You and your entire coaching staff are going out constantly. Tournaments, showcases. How many thousands of people email Bucknell, I want to be, I know nothing about your school, but I want to be a Bison.
Right.
And how difficult has that become for the 4 of you guys? Because it's got to end up almost being like a draft room, right? I'm graduating 3 pitchers. I need 3 pitchers, right? There's only 8 guys, as you said, per year that you need in a normal year. What's that process like in 2025 with the millions of tournaments you're going to?
For sure. I think, with the email stuff, like I could only do that and do a good job responding, evaluating, breaking guys down and kind of seeing who we want to go watch play, whatever. I could only do that and work full days. Like the amount of email that we get I get over, I probably get about 200 emails a day, a lot, probably 100 of that's junk, but, probably 100 in terms of baseball stuff and, things that I gotta, process. And, in the old days, we got obviously a lot less and, you processed it, you evaluated it, and, we, like say Jordan, for example, we found out about him and expressed interest, came to a camp, that type of deal. That stuff still happens. And I think it's important to process all that, to have a system in place. But you can't spend all your time there. You got to go watch and play. And, the summer is difficult. I'm on the road a lot. All my assistants, I have 3 assistants that are out on the road a lot and attending, tournaments are great to go to. If I really want to evaluate somebody, my favorite thing is like high school playoffs. All right. I learn a lot about somebody in the high school playoffs. I want to go watch that. And then, tournaments where winning matters a little bit. Our camps are really productive for us because it's all kids that are super interested. And, I'd say about half our guys kind of, have attended one of our camps at some point, with that. But seeing them play in a tournament is paramount for us. We usually see guys 3 or 4 times, before we really make a decision. So we learn a lot about them. I think that's key, in making the right decision. You want to see them, hopefully on their best day, maybe a bad day too, and see how they respond. We watch how their teammates interact with them. Do they like them? Are they happy when that kid gets a hit, or is he off on his own? We want somebody that is a good teammate. So we look into that type of stuff, and you really can only tell that how they interact with their teammates. And I think both high school and tournament games are important to see. Showcases, like we're pretty productive in those too. I mean, that's there's showcases that you can go to that maybe cast out a bigger net. Show ball is one we do a lot. That I'm there with a lot of head coaches, and there's a lot of kids getting recruited out of those events and having success. It's kind of a great way to put your name out there if you do well at it. But that's like a one-day thing, and you got to kind of produce on that day. You don't have a good day, it's hard, and it's not cheap. It's expensive.
So typically you would see them at a show ball or a head first, then invite them to your camp, or like is there a specific way you do this?
Right.
Let's say you don't know, because Lewisburg is 3 hours from me, right? The one thing I tell parents all the time is I can make more money. I can't get time back, right? So I want to use my time most wisely. If that kid is getting an invite from you or one of your coaches, there was something interesting about that kid that you wanted a better look at, correct?
For sure. There's different levels to that. There's a mass, probably like mailing that we send anybody that's expressed interest. They're in our database. We're going to want to let everybody know that we're having a camp. And that's one level of, kind of showing interest, but that's probably not enough for me to spend, I have a daughter, like if she's, wants to, that's probably not enough for me to spend my money, just on that. It would have to be more of a direct, an invite, a text, a phone call, like, hey, we'd love to, see it, saw you, liked you. Or it could be, we like your video, like we break down all the video that we see. We have a system that we process it. We rate them, and that allows us to to kind of decide who to, go see. And, when you go to a tournament and there's 75 games going on at one time,
with 4
how do you
coaches.
pick who you go watch? And Jason and I, or maybe we even had a third guy in Atlanta. And he said to me, he goes, we're missing 85% of what's going on at all times. We're missing, it's really hard to choose. So, the showcase gets you in front of guys in a more direct way. And, but to me, it's not enough to say I'm going on this guy based off what I saw, in a 1-1 count, scrimmage type of thing like that. Like, it's really how we evaluate hitters. It's really hard to do that because I don't get to see their swing decisions in a real light. So I got to go see them again, but or bring them to camp, all that type of stuff.
No, it's great. I mean, that's great for the audience to hear. I'm going to give you one. It's going to lead into a question, but you definitely failed this one. You ended up taking Jordan and had probably one of the worst dads ever. I'm kidding, in the program. How much attention do you and your coach, because one of the things I preach to our travel program is programs are not just recruiting you. They're recruiting your family. They're recruiting no drama. They are recruiting support. I tell people all the time, there are 2 types of parents. There are the behind home plate, behind the dugout parents, and there are the down the line parents. And I want all of my parents to be down the line parents. I don't want kids looking at their parents if they do something good or they make a mistake, and regardless of the age. But I preach that to the older guys. How much of the entire family unit is because that goes back to character, right, Coach? I mean,
for sure.
You want to get an idea of who the parents are, where they come from. Is this kid, spoiled? Is he a hardworking kid? Is he gritty? How much of that plays into what you do?
Character is really a lot about parenting, with that. And, so we are evaluating the parents, for sure. And, it really, comes from the parents. And there has been multiple times where the offer has been pulled with the guy on campus. By saying pulled, like we wait until that meeting, until we have somebody on campus. And going into the visit, we were all in on the player, but we decided not to based on how the parents like. So what are things that happens where, where you can just tell, like maybe the parent wants it more than the kid, with that. And the parent is talking more than the kid, and we try to talk directly to the kid. And certainly parents have questions and they're a big part of it. You certainly helped in that process in evaluating Jordan. We like baseball guys. You're a baseball guy. And with that, and we knew that you weren't super involved in the process a whole lot, like over, we talked, but it was good, with that. And more than that, though, we knew people that knew you and they recommended you and vouched for you. And you played with maybe a couple of our alums and things like that. So that matters. If they didn't like you, or something like that, it does matter. And it's hard to get that right every time. You don't know, but by and large, like we've had tremendous parents and it's a big part of things we look at. And, there's times that I guess you want to make sure you get that right because they're such a part of our program because we need their support, and it's a lot of grind that you go through. Our parents travel with us and it's great. Like we didn't have the best weekend, this weekend, and our parents were there supporting our guys, like the most upbeat people, helping our guys. And I think we're resilient, because of our parents.
You talked about how big of a part of the program. I'm going to be honest with you. Of the three situations I had at Bucknell, NYU, and Columbia, I missed my time at Bucknell. And I'm not just saying that because I got you on. You're right. Every weekend, food was planned. Every trip to Florida, I mean, somebody else took the ball and ran with it, and the involvement, the positivity that surrounded the boys was always at an incredible level. So for me, why is it so important? Because I'm going to have your son for 4 years. I don't need drama. Why is it important from this side? And I happen to really, really have a tremendous amount of respect for Coach Depew, but I knew he was leaving. We had this conversation. For me as a parent, it was equally as important to who I was giving my child to. Who was going to take my child as a young man and help him get to these goals, and not just on the baseball field, whether it was the academics or the emotional stuff, the mental stuff. Having guys like you and Jason, especially when Jordan went through his Tommy John surgery, right? Having guys who pitched and helped him through that stuff, for me, was so important. It's so much more important the other way around, having the positivity and the drama. I got a crazy question for you. So you're a young man with young girls. The field is already named Gene Depew. By the time Scott Heather's done, they're going to have to do Gene Depew Field at Scott Heather Stadium. What? Think about the impact you've had on that community so far, Coach. Do you ever take a minute to reflect on what you've done in your 20-plus years?
Well, I still think I got a long ways to go, for that. But that's the best part of the job, is the impact that you can make. And, if you work together, parents and coaches, you can have that impact. And that's something that is probably harder to do with the transfer portal. It really hits me hard when we've had a few guys leave. It hits me hard when they leave, because I know that's a relationship I'm losing, and I always take it personal in a way, and maybe I shouldn't, but I do, because seeing a guy grow into becoming a man and leaving here ready for the next step in their life, and knowing you played a small part in that and helped them along the way. Try to teach them how to deal with adversity, all the benefits you get from playing college sports, that will help you the rest of your life. You have to have that in the back of your mind. And that's what I love. I got a text this morning from a group of alums that, coming back to watch us play, and they want to golf, and, going to weddings, things like that are, mean the world to me, because, I know I played a part in their experience and helped them grow. And I remember that more than all the wins and the losses. And, I want to make an impact, and I want that to be positive. And I want them to look back at it and kind of view it that way. So that's my goal, and, I have 2 daughters. I think that was for a reason, because, I have 35 sons, every year that I get to do that. I always wanted, a son, and I get that, by having these guys, and I treat them like that. And, my daughters are a huge part of the program. They're around. My oldest is sneaking in the dugout a lot and coming in and asking questions in the middle of tight moments. But, but I love that she wants to be a part of it and wants to be around. She could be doing a lot of other things that at that time, that I probably wouldn't want her to do. So I let her get away with it. And, I like being a girl dad as well, too.
Nothing better. But I want to tell you, I want to thank you for what you do for all these young men. People often ask me how I define success. And when you love and you're passionate, Those are two things you can't fake, Coach. You can't fake loving what you do and being passionate about what you do. I will never know if I'm successful because the way I define success is how many people will end up being at my funeral. How many people did I impact at some point of my or their lives? When you love what you do and you're passionate about what you do, you're blessed to have what you do, to be doing what you do. And you, with an incredible wife and two beautiful daughters, allow you to continue to do what you do at Bucknell. And I want to thank you for your time today. And as you know, you've been a big part of the Holtz family. And Jordan was so excited when I told him that we were going to spend a little time together. You're still an incredible role model. He's thinking about renting an Airbnb and bringing the whole family out for a series this spring. He's out of his mind. But that's how much and how positive his memories are of you and the program. So thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Well, that means the world to me. It was, it was joy to coach Jordan and count him as a friend today, somebody that, just love to see. And it's like we didn't skip a beat. He's one of my favorite, players all time. And what, I think pretty successful. I was driving in New York one time. I saw you on a billboard, so you've had a lot of success in this baseball world. And I thought that was pretty cool. And the things you've done, in this program, your passion for the game, your love for the game is infectious. It helped our program win. So many times you helped not just your son, other sons on the team. I saw that happen this weekend, with another dad supporting a kid that, maybe had an offer, came back the next game, had 5 hits. Wasn't his son, but he was passing on some knowledge to him. That type of stuff is awesome. And you did that. For our program, you had a huge impact. So thank you for everything you do in the game. It's inspiring, and you're still out there helping kids, and keep doing what you do. It has a lot of impact.
I look forward to seeing you soon. Send my love to the family, and thanks for spending time with us.
For sure. Thank you.